So you're thinking about building a pretty massive home server, right? Maybe
Yeah.
72 terabytes of storage.
Yeah, a big project.
You want it fast, you want it super reliable, and you absolutely need to make sure your data, your photos, your files are safe.
Definitely. Data safety is paramount.
But then you hit the forums, maybe Reddit or somewhere, and everyone's shouting about needing astronomical amounts of RAM.
Oh yeah, the RAM requirements, that's a big topic.
Numbers that could, frankly, make your budget just weep. So is it actually true? Do you need a fortune in memory for a solid ZFS system?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the several $100 RAM question.
Yeah, exactly. So for this deep dive, we're zeroing in on a very real dilemma from a listener, planning a huge 72 TB NAS,
Okay.
using 4 18 TB refurbished hard drives, an Intel N100 system, specifically a Ugreen DXP 4800, and they're on a strict 16 GB RAM budget.
Right, that's a common scenario. Big storage ambitions, but realistic hardware constraints, especially that 16 GB RAM limit on the N100 box.
Yeah.
So the core question we're going to try and answer today is, can that 16 GB of RAM really work for ZFS on such a big 72 TB system?
Especially when you see guides recommending so much more, right?
Exactly. Some guides suggest, well, crazy amounts. We'll look into the precise setup and the insights needed to make it work without spending a fortune.
So what we'll unpack today: why ZFS is so appealing in the first place, then we'll bust some common and honestly quite pervasive RAM myths.
Good. Those myths cause a lot of confusion.
We'll explore the best ways to protect your irreplaceable data, navigate the tricky world of SSD caching. Is it worth it?
L2ARC and special VDEVs. Always interesting.
And finally, some tips for fine-tuning your system to get the best performance out of it.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's start there then. Why ZFS? Why is it seen as this revolution, the gold standard for NAS, both at home and in the enterprise?
Well, it really comes down to a few core strengths that tackle the biggest data worries people have. First, robust protection against speech rot.
That silent data corruption.
Yes. Exactly. ZFS actively checks and corrects it.
Yeah.
Then you've got incredibly powerful snapshot capabilities. Think of it like instant time travel for your data.
Okay.
And finally, its built-in redundancy, like RAID, avoids many pitfalls of traditional hardware RAID controllers. It's just designed for data integrity from the ground up.
And for our listener, their goals are pretty typical for a home NAS user, right?
And seems like it.
Storing disposable media, movies, TV shows, alongside critical stuff like family photos. That's a common mix.
Very common. The irreplaceable versus the easily replaceable.
They also want to sync data using Nextcloud, probably running on a Raspberry Pi 5 nearby.
Okay, so file sync is important.
Run automated downloads with the R Suite, Sonar, Radar, those tools.
Standard media automation. Got it.
And crucially, backing up the really essential data to Proton Drive for that offsite safety net.
Smart. Offsite backup is non-negotiable for critical data.
And importantly, no plans for transcoding media on the NAS itself. Just straightforward streaming, maybe quick access for thumbnails and previews.
That simplifies things a lot, actually. Transcoding is CPU and sometimes RAM intensive.
So, given those goals, the user was set on ZFS's RAID Z2 configuration for maximum data survival.
A very sensible choice, especially with 4 drives. RAID Z2 means any 2 drives can fail and your data is still safe.
That's where the worry started, right? The RAM.
Yep. They see guides mentioning 8 GB minimum, maybe more, sometimes that infamous 1 GB per TB rule, or even wilder numbers like 5 GB per TB.
5 gigs per terabyte, that's insane for 72 TB.
It's completely unrealistic for most users, and honestly, that's where so much confusion starts for people new to ZFS. They see these numbers and think it's out of reach.
Okay, so let's tackle that head on. The 1 GB per TB rule. Where does it come from, and why is it mostly wrong for home users like our listener?
Right. This rule is largely a relic, or perhaps misunderstood. It specifically relates to a ZFS feature called deduplication.
Dedupe. I've heard of that.
Deduplication is extremely RAM hungry.
Yeah.
Because ZFS needs to keep a massive table in memory, the deduplication table, or DDT, to track every unique block of data across the entire pool.
So it can avoid storing the same block twice.
Exactly. It saves space, which can be great for certain workloads like virtual machine images or backups, lots of repeated data. But for home users, storing mostly unique media files and photos.
Probably not much duplicate data to find anyway.
Precisely. The space savings are often minimal, and the RAM cost is huge. So for this listener and most home users, deduplication is overkill. And the crucial point is, Without deduplication, ZFS's RAM needs are far, far more modest.
So 16 GB isn't just scraping by, it's actually workable.
Absolutely. For this kind of workload without dedupe, 16 GB is often described as a sweet spot. It's enough for the OS and for ZFS to do its caching magic effectively.
And let's reiterate the hardware limits here. The Ugreen DXP 4800 powered by an Intel N100.
Yep, a low-power chip.
And it has only a single DDR5 RAM slot, maxed out at 16 GB.
That's the ceiling. No adding more later.
And upgrading to that 16 GB stick was already a stretch, about $50 after they got a good deal on those 4 18 TB refurbished drives.
So budget is definitely a factor. Every component choice matters.
Now, the online community, the experts they consulted, what was the consensus on 16 GB for this specific workload?
Overwhelmingly positive, actually. They confirmed 16 GB is more than enough. The key technology here is ZFS's adaptive replacement cache, or ARC.
ARC, okay, what does that do?
Think of ARC as ZFS's main brain for caching. It intelligently uses a portion of your system RAM to store frequently accessed data and metadata, things like file names, directory structures, permissions.
So it avoids hitting the slower hard drives all the time.
Exactly. By default, ZFS can use up to 50% of your total system RAM for the ARC. So with 16 GB, that's potentially 8 GB dedicated just to caching.
8 GB of cache sounds pretty decent.
It is. Now, for a 72 TB pool, the amount of metadata can vary. Big movie files, like an 80 GB MKV. Very little metadata relative to their size.
Right, just one file entry, basically.
But thousands and thousands of small family photos. That generates significantly more metadata.
Makes sense. Lots of little entries to track.
But even then, the community wisdom suggests that around 3 GB of RRC is typically enough to hold most of the metadata for even large home pools.
So 3 GB out of the available 8 GB for RC.
Yeah, roughly. Which means you still have plenty of RRC space left over for caching actual data that gets read frequently.
And you mentioned a real-world example.
Yes, a great one. Someone in the forums had a similar setup, 16 GB RAM, managing a 48 TB pool.
Okay.
And they were running Jellyfin, which is a media server like Plex.
Known for using a fair bit of RAM itself.
Oh yeah, Jellyfin can easily eat 8 to 10 gigabytes of RAM just by itself, managing its library and streams.
Wow. So it's 16 GB total.
Even with Jellyfin running, their ZFS RC still maintained an impressive 95% plus cache hit rate.
Meaning 95% of requests were served from fast RAM.
Exactly. Directly from RC, avoiding the slow spinning disks almost entirely for those cached items. It shows how effective RAC is, even when RAM is shared with other apps.
So for our listener who isn't planning to run Jellyfin or Plex directly on the NAS.
Right, their workload is much lighter. Just TrueNAS itself, maybe Nextcloud Sync running in a container, and those background downloads.
So 16 GB gives them
ample breathing room. It's more than sufficient for TrueNAS Core or Scale, the ARC, and those other lightweight services. It really should perform very well.
Okay, that's reassuring on the RAM front. Let's talk data protection. 4 18 TB drives leaning towards RAID Z2. Why was the community so supportive of RAID Z2, especially with refurbished drives?
RAID Z2 allows any 2 drives in the pool to fail simultaneously without losing any data. That double parity is huge for peace of mind.
Especially with irreplaceable family photos.
Absolutely. And when you're using refurbished drives, which, let's be honest, inherently carry a slightly higher risk of failure than brand new ones.
That extra safety margin feels really important.
It really does. You sacrifice capacity, of course. With 4 18 TB drives in RAID Z2, you get roughly 36 TB of usable space, not 72 TB.
Half the raw capacity for double drive failure protection.
It's a trade-off. But for critical data, many feel it's well worth it.
Now, some people suggested an alternative, a mirrored setup, like RAID 10.
Yeah, the alternative would be 2 mirrored pairs. So drive A mirrors drive B, and drive C mirrors drive D. Then you stripe across those pairs.
What are the pros and cons there?
Mirrors generally offer better random I/O performance, especially writes, and expanding the pool later can be simpler by adding another mirrored pair.
Okay, sounds potentially good.
But the big downside is fault tolerance. In a 4-drive mirrored setup, if both drives in a single mirror pair fail, say, drive A and drive B, your entire pool is gone.
Ah, so even though you still have 2 healthy drives, C and D, the pool fails.
Correct, because the stripe across the pairs is broken. With RAID Z2, any 2 drives can fail. Drive A and C, fine. Drive B and D, fine. Drive A and B, also fine.
So for a relatively small 4-drive setup, RAID Z2 just offers objectively better resilience against drive failure.
Overwhelmingly, yes. For maximizing data survival chances with 4 drives, RAID Z2 is the strong consensus recommendation.
Especially with those refurbs. Which brings up another point. how do you manage the risk of refurbished drives?
Testing, testing, testing. Before you even think about putting data on them, run rigorous tests. Tools like Bad Blocks and Linux can do a thorough surface scan. It takes time, maybe days per drive.
But it finds potential problems early.
Exactly. Find weak sectors or outright failures before they can cause data loss. And once the pool is running, enable regular ZFS scrubs.
What do scrubs do?
Scrubs are ZFS's built-in health check. They read all the data in the pool and verify its checksums against the stored metadata. If it finds corruption, and you have redundancy like RAID Z2, it can often automatically repair it.
So proactive testing up front and regular checks afterward.
That's the strategy. Plus, monitoring smart data from the drives helps predict failures too.
And layering the Proton drive backup on top for the absolute essentials?
Yes, the 3-2-1 rule essentially. Multiple copies, different media, one offsite. RAID Z2 and Scrubs handle the local copies and integrity. Proton Drive handles the offsite.
Okay, let's shift to SSD caching. The listener had a 500 gigabit M2 SSD they wanted to use, probably as an L2RC, but the community was skeptical.
Yeah, L2RR, or Level 2 ARC, sounds great in theory. It's using a fast SSD to extend your RAM cache, the ARS. Data that gets pushed out of the main ARS and RAM can land on the L2 ARC SSD.
So more cache space, sounds good.
It can be, but there's a catch. First, managing the L2RC itself consumes some of your primary ARCs and RAM. For a 500 gigabit L2RC, that's around 350 millibeats of precious RAM used just for indexing the SSD cache.
Okay, not huge, but not zero either.
Right. But the bigger issue for this specific workload, mostly large media files streamed sequentially, is that L2RC often doesn't help much.
Why not?
Because you tend to read those large files once, from start to finish. They might get cached briefly in ARS, maybe spill to L2RC, but you're unlikely to reread that exact same data block again soon.
So the data in the L2RC cache doesn't get many hits.
Exactly. We saw that example earlier. A user with a similar setup reported their 256 GB L2 AirRC only had a 55% hit rate. Nearly half the stuff written to it was never read again before being evicted.
While their main RAM arc was hitting 98%.
Precisely. The RAM arc was doing the heavy lifting. So, for sequential reads, L2 ARC can be a bit of a trap, using an SSD slot and consuming RAM for potentially little benefit.
So if L2 isn't the best use for that 500 gigabit SSD, what is the alternative?
A much more compelling option discussed was using the SSD as a special VDEV.
Special VDEV, what does that specialize in?
It's designed specifically to store metadata and optionally small file blocks. Think about browsing folders with thousands of photos.
Lots of small thumbnail files and directory listings.
Exactly. Accessing all that metadata and those small files from spinning hard drives can be slow. Offloading it to a fast SSD special VDEV can dramatically speed up things like directory browsing, file listing, and maybe Nextcloud performance if it deals with many small files.
Okay, that sounds genuinely useful for the photo gallery use case.
It can be. However, there's a critical warning here. A single SSD used as a special VDEV becomes a single point of failure for the entire pool.
Wait, if that one SSD fails, you lose the whole 72 TB pool, even with RAID Z2 on the hard drives?
Yes, because the pool's essential metadata lives on that special VDEV. Lose the metadata, lose the pool, it's a significant risk.
So how do you mitigate that?
The recommendation is always to use mirrored SSDs for a special VDEV. Two identical SSDs providing redundancy.
But the Ugreen DXP 4800 only has one M2 slot, right?
Correct. So a redundant special VDEV wasn't an option with the current hardware.
So given the risks of a single drive special VDEV and the limited benefit of L2 ARC for this workload,
the community consensus leaned towards skipping both L2 ARC and the special VDEV for now. Rely on the 16 GB of RAM for the primary ARC cache, which we established should be quite effective.
And the SSD, what could it be used for then?
A safe and potentially useful option is to simply use it as a separate pool or dataset to host things that benefit from speed but aren't part of the main ZFS pool, like maybe install the Nextcloud application data onto the SSD for faster UI responsiveness.
Okay, that makes sense. Keep it separate, use its speed, but don't tie the main pool's fate to it.
Exactly.
Let's talk operating systems. TrueNAS Core versus Scale. The listener initially leaned towards Core for simplicity.
Yeah, Core is FreeBSD-based, very storage-focused, rock solid. Traditionally, it didn't have the built-in container or VM support that Scale has.
And Scale is Linux-based.
Correct. TrueNAS Scale uses Debian Linux as its base and has integrated support for Docker containers and KVM virtual machines. This makes it much easier to run applications directly on the NAS.
Like Nextcloud or the R Suite.
Precisely. Instead of needing a separate Raspberry Pi for Nextcloud, you could potentially run it directly in a container on TrueNAS Scale. That simplifies the whole setup.
How much RAM does Scale itself need?
Scale generally requires a bit more RAM for its base services than Core, maybe around 4 GB or so for the OS and its Kubernetes backend, which manages the apps.
So in a 16 GB system, that leaves around 12 GB for RSE and any apps you run.
Roughly, yes. Which, as we discussed, is still quite healthy for the RSE, especially given the workload.
So Scale offers more flexibility for running those desired apps directly.
Definitely. For this user wanting Nextcloud sync and download tools integrated, Scale seemed like a potentially better fit, streamlining the whole setup onto one box.
What about ZFS's own RAM needs? We sometimes hear ZFS itself can run on very little RAM, like 2 GB.
It's true that the core ZFS file system module is remarkably efficient. You can build a minimal Linux system with ZFS on, say, 2 GB or 4 GB of RAM, and it will function for basic file storage.
But TrueNAS isn't just ZFS, is it?
No, TrueNAS, both core and Scale, is a full-fledged operating system built around ZFS. It has the web interface, middleware, management services, reporting, alerting, application handling.
Yeah.
All that adds overhead.
And maybe some safety features too.
Yes, that's a good point someone raised. TrueNAS has built-in safeguards, like automatically configuring swap space. This is crucial, because if ZFS runs completely out of memory during a high-stress operation, like importing a pool or during a resilver after drive failure, bad things can happen. Swap provides a safety buffer.
So while ZFS can run lean, the recommended minimums for TrueNAS account for the whole package.
Exactly. 16 GB becomes a practical recommendation for a smooth TrueNAS experience, allowing the OS to run comfortably alongside a healthy ARC and potentially some lightweight apps.
Okay, beyond the big choices, what about smaller tweaks for performance? The community usually has tips.
Oh, absolutely. First one, compression. ZFS compression, usually LEC4, is often enabled by default on datasets.
Does it actually help performance? I thought compression used CPU.
It does use a little CPU, but modern CPUs are so fast, and LZ4 is so efficient it's usually negligible. The benefit comes because you're writing less data to the slow-spinning disks.
Extends drive life too, maybe.
Potentially, yes. And crucially, it can actually speed up reads. Decompressing data from RAM is often faster than reading more uncompressed data from a slow disk. So leave LZ4 compression on unless you have a very specific reason not to.
Good tip. What about record size? You mentioned that earlier.
Right. The record size is the maximum size of a data block ZFS will write for a file in that dataset. The default is usually 128 KB.
Which is fine for mixed use, maybe.
Yeah, but for large sequential files like movies or backups, using a larger record size like 1 MB or even 4 MB is much more efficient.
Why?
Fewer metadata blocks are needed to track the file's data. Less metadata means less RAM needed in the RSC to cache that metadata, and potentially faster sequential reads because the disk is seeking less often.
So set a larger record size, like 1 MB on the dataset where you store movies.
Exactly. You can set it per dataset. So your photos dataset might keep the default 128K, but your media dataset gets 1M.
Smart. Any other classic tweaks? Disabling a time?
Yeah, add a time updates a file's access time every time it's read. This causes extra writes. Modern systems often default to really time, which is much better. It only updates a time under certain conditions.
So maybe less critical now.
Less critical than it used to be, but explicitly setting a time off in your ZFS datasets costs nothing and still eliminates some unnecessary writes. It's generally good practice, especially if any part of your system involves flash storage, like maybe that Pi's SD card syncing via Nextcloud.
Got it. And a Shift 12, that used to be essential for 4K sector drives.
That's another one where things have gotten easier. A Shift 12 tells ZFS the underlying drives use 4K physical sectors. Using the wrong a shift, like a Shift 9 for 512-byte sectors on a 4K drive, kills performance.
So do we still need to set it manually?
Mostly no. ZFS is now much better at auto-detecting the correct sector size for modern drives. So while it was crucial advice years ago, new users setting up pools today generally don't need to worry about manually setting a Shift 12. ZFS usually gets it right.
That simplifies things. Okay, taking a step back, any broader context or external insights that reinforce these findings?
Well, it's worth remembering ZFS's origins at Sun Microsystems. It was designed from the start to combine enterprise reliability with ease of management. That core design philosophy, especially copy on write, is why it's so good at data integrity.
And performance-wise, how does it stack up today?
Recent benchmarks, sites like Phoronix often test file systems, ZFS on Linux, which Scale uses, and ZFS on FreeBSD, which Core uses, generally show very competitive performance, especially for sequential workloads like media streaming, even on modest hardware like that N100.
So it's not just reliable, it's reasonably fast, too.
Yes, particularly for the kind of large file reads typical in a NAS.
And circling back to those refurbished drives and risk, any hard data on failure rates?
It's tricky because data varies by model, age, and usage. But large operators like Backblaze, who publish drive stats, generally show that refurbished or older drives do have higher failure rates. Their 2024 reports might suggest, say, a 2–3% higher annualized failure rate compared to new drives of similar models.
So not catastrophic, but definitely a measurable increase in risk.
Exactly, which just hammers home why RAID Z2's dual parity, rigorous initial testing with tools like bad blocks, ongoing smart monitoring, and regular ZFS scrubs are so important when using them. You need those layers of defense.
Right, so the strategy becomes use RAID Z2 and ZFS scrubs for system resilience, Smart for prediction, and then Proton Drive for that crucial offsite backup.
This is a really solid modern data protection strategy. It covers multiple failure scenarios.
So let's try and wrap this up. What's the big takeaway here?
I think the main point is that building a massive, reliable 72 TB NAS using ZFS on a budget, specifically with just 16 gigabytes of RAM, is absolutely achievable.
It's not just a pipe dream based on forum myths.
Not at all. With smart choices like RAID Z2 for redundancy with those refurbished drives, understanding that 16 GB is plenty for RFA without deduplication, and maybe choosing TrueNAS Scale for its integrated app flexibility, you can build a really capable system.
It seems the secret isn't just throwing more RAM at the problem, which is often the first instinct.
No, it's about configuration, understanding ZFS features, skipping things you don't need, like L2 ARC or dedupe in this case, rigorously testing your hardware, especially the drives, and leveraging ZFS's built-in strengths like compression and snapshots.
This setup really does prove you don't need enterprise-level budgets to get serious about your storage game at home.
Definitely not. Smart choices trump expensive hardware much of the time. It's about understanding the tools and tailoring them.
So a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. As you embark on your own data storage adventures, maybe building your first NAS or upgrading an old one, how can focusing on that thoughtful configuration, really understanding the why behind the settings, rather than just relying on brute force hardware upgrades?
How can that not only save you money, but maybe also give you a deeper appreciation and control over the technology that's safeguarding your most important digital stuff?
Your NAS adventure starts now.